This talk is about virtualized Emacs. I'm going to explain exactly what I mean by that in a few seconds, and it's mostly to give you a preview. It's how I use Emacs on a daily basis and how I chose to use Emacs. And I hope that some of the aspects that I've encountered, some of the lessons I've seen can help or may be interesting to any of us here. So before I explain exactly what it is, I'm going to start with why. And why is often a problem, which I've encountered a couple of times, and I'm sure a lot of people encounter this problem, and it is Emacs on Windows. That is the plague, people, the plague. And mostly the problem is you are at a company, they force you to use Windows, or you have one of these rare machines with the elusive network card driver that just doesn't work on Linux, and you're stuck on Windows for some reason. But you really, really want to use Emacs because, you know, yeah, right, we all know why. We all know why. So I worked on this. I suffered on Emacs on Windows for quite a couple months, almost a year actually, and I tried a couple of solutions. I think the most classic one, what I've seen a lot of people do, is the combo Emacs for Windows and Cygwin, where essentially there's an official port of Emacs for Windows, and you install on top of it or next to it Cygwin, or any other utility, which basically gives you a Linux-like terminal on Windows. The problem with that, as you can see, is that the setup is quite heavy. Honestly, installing Cygwin is quite a pain. You have to choose the packages that you want. If you miss one, you have to restart. It's super slow, and you miss a ton of features. Like if you use LaTeX, good luck making that work on Windows. I've heard of some legends, people getting that to work. I've never seen it with my own eyes. But yeah, that's something I tried for quite a while, and I can't recommend it at the end of the day. Then recently we've seen Emacs on Bash for Windows with Windows 10, which works better. Definitely, you have a real Ubuntu system under the hood, so it does work to some extent. But as of today, it's only terminal-based. So if you use packages like Helm, for example, you will encounter some issues, and that does break your workflow quite a bit. Also, it is still a bit slow compared to pure Emacs on Linux. And if you want GUI, it is possible, but you have to jump through some hoops. It's kind of hacky today to get something like LXD working on Windows through Bash. And the last, okay, I hope you can see, yeah. The last way is Chocolatey, which is, I personally have not tried that in depth, but it's essentially a package manager for Windows. It's using PowerShell and non-assisted install to do a lot of install for you under the hood. Again, some people like it. I perceive that did not work out for me. That's not really a solution I consider. So what I ended up doing in the end, and that's at first I thought was a little bit crazy, was to use simply Emacs running inside a Linux VM, running inside your host. So you can see my fantastic drawing there. It's a Windows machine running Arch Linux, running Emacs in it. So like, okay, what's new about this? What's interesting about this? Well, really not so much if you think about it, but the fact is it works, and it made me question how I was using Emacs on a daily basis, and it did bring a lot of improvements to my workflow. So before we go into the technicals, let's look a little bit at the advantages of this. Why? Oh, also I should have mentioned that first, but of course, if you can't understand me, if you have questions, or if my accent's too thick, let me know. The talk is a little bit short, so if I can pad it with anything, I'll take it. Huh? So the advantages, and that's what we'll see. The setup for the whole thing is fairly automated. You have very little to do on your host machine, and it will work. It will do a lot of heavy lifting for you. You don't have to go through the Cygwin install. You don't have to install Chocolatey or that stuff. Also, it will work great if you don't have admin access on your host machine. We'll cover what you need, but if you work at a financial institution or at companies which don't let you control your computer, it quickly becomes a problem. So then you have, yeah, as I was saying, minimal work on the host machine. Really bare. I try to have as few layers as possible. You can get fancy if you want. We'll cover that at the end, but really, really bare. And then the workspace that you generate is, from the nature of the VM, very secluded. So that means that if you don't have admin access or root on your host machine, Well, you're essentially spinning up a new computer where you have root access. If you configure VirtualBox correctly, you will have your own network card, your own IP within the network. You can set your own DNS. That may or may not lead you to jump around your company's firewall, but that's up to you to do. It's basically freedom within like something where you were constrained originally. Then the workspace is totally expandable. If you mess up, you can just destroy the VM, you spawn a new one, it takes 5 minutes. And there will be an interactive part. While I do the talk, I'm going to try to spin up a VM. I tested earlier, it worked, but this is a live demo. So worst case, we're all going to see me debug and boom, talk padded. It's going to be great. But yeah, so if you mess up, if you delete like your binary folder, or worse, you install PHP and you don't know how to do with it, you just scratch it, just burn everything. Then finally, that's really useful, I like it a lot, you can just save the state of your machine. I think we've all been there where we have 20 buffers open, 5 terminal windows, and 4 Chrome tabs. You can never close them, and you just have to leave instantly, shut down your computer, and take a plane. Save the state of your machine, it takes 20 seconds. You can turn off the computer and come back, it's as it was. So let's talk a little bit about the requirements quickly. So all you need really essentially is VirtualBox installed, which you can get installed really easily. It's good software. I use Arch Linux. That's my preferred distro, but really anything you'd like. I like it simply because it's rolling release and it's very easy to script the install. Then a bunch of shell scripts, and finally the Emacs config, and that's where I'm headed because this is an Emacs meetup, so we're headed there. Quickly before I get started, we're going to talk in detail what the stack looks like. So we have a Windows host, VirtualBox, Arch Linux, X server, and I like to put the i3 Windows Manager. That's up to you. Yeah, thank you. I personally like it a lot, but the idea is you want to squeeze out as much RAM as you can out of your VM, and then you want to compromise with how comfortable you are. I've seen some crazy people without any Windows Manager just using Emacs. It's possible, it works. Personally, I like the comfort of i3. I think we can all agree on that. It's about 5.5 megabytes of RAM, I think it takes, which is really nothing. Okay, so let's get into the fun part. Let's try this thing. First, I'm going to do the VirtualBox setup in front of you, which is 8 gigabytes of space on disk, 1 gigabyte of RAM, a clipboard shared in both directions, and I like to do 2 shared folders, org and workspace. And what essentially that's going to allow me is just, I have on my Windows machine these 2 folders that exist, and they're going to be consistent and permanent across all my VMs, so I can edit them. And I try to get this set up automatic. So let's test it. Let's see if it works. Can you all see? Yeah. All right. Let's do a new VM. In case the whole thing fails, as you can see, I have another one that I prepared today, so have no fear. Up, 1 gig, new hard drive, up. Actually, I might want to do, I like to do fixed size, just personal preference. 8 gig, let's create it. It's going to take about a minute to create the hard drive. Oh, maybe a little bit faster. Yeah, I think we could stare at it a little bit. Do you have any questions before I jump? Anything? Did I skim something? Was I too quick? No? All right. So I'm going to take that as good news. Yes?
How long were you working with Emacs before you decided to attack this problem?
So I worked during college years. I was under Arch Linux purely, so I worked for about 2 years with Emacs on pure Arch Linux. Then I did a little bit Emacs on Mac OS. That also worked really well. And then I worked solid 8 months with Emacs on Windows. I tried that. It's honestly it's not terrible, but if you just like org mode, for example, it does take quite a bit to just start Emacs and get started. And if you just want to take some notes quickly, it really kills your workflow. Okay, so I have everything powered. So I'm just gonna start my fresh VM. All right. So that's an ISO I downloaded today. It's the latest one of Arch Linux. So I'm going to start that. While it's doing, I'm also going to activate shared clipboard. Oh, here we go. I forgot to create my shared drives. No problem. I'm just going to do that now. Shared folders. I just add them before I forget. Okay. So that's org folder, making it auto mount. All right, good to go. Let's do that again. All right. So the first thing we're going to do is I have on my GitHub, I have a collection of shell scripts that will essentially perform the install for me. And I did a short link via a Google URL shortener that's essentially just going to download the raw file for me, put it as a bash script on the VM, and just run it. So that's what I'm going to do first. Then that's going to trigger a series of things which we'll gloss over and essentially will install Arch for me. So it's wget nope. T. Let me double check it's correct. Google zpamtt-o install. Okay. All right. Now I'm just going to run it, and I'm going to let it run in the background while I keep talking. Huh? So it's going to ask me for the username I want to create, the password for that user, and that's just a quick trick. I don't know if you can read it. It says, do you want to skip rank mirrors? If you ever use Arch Linux, essentially that's an option that allows you to benchmark the different package mirrors up front, and depending on your internet connection, it will take 5 to 7 minutes and just test all the mirrors and rank them and pick the top 6 or the top n mirrors, so that after every subsequent calls to download packages will be faster. If I use the VM for quite a while, I'd like to do it and pay the upfront cost, but today I'm just gonna skip it. It's gonna save me 5 minutes. All right, so it's gone, it started. It's just gonna install Arch Linux in the background. We won't have to worry about it normally. We'll come back to it when we're done. All right, let's go back to the presentation. All right. So that's running. What exactly is going to run? That's a quick overview. If anybody is interested and wants more detail, we can maybe cover this after the talk, but you know, this is mostly shell stuff. I don't want to bring my shell scripts to the Lisp fight, you know, the common saying. Well, essentially, I'm just going to partition the hard drive, set up a bootloader. It's going to set date, time, local, hostname, all that stuff, install every packages that I need, create an admin user, set up i3, and then git clone the Emacs config. That's all going to happen. I'm just not worried about it for now. So let's talk a little bit Emacs. Finally. Nobody is smiling. All right, I guess. So what do we want from an Emacs, from a modern, I would say a modern config file? We like it to be literate with org mode. I think you covered org mode in, no, you may have. But basically, I think I'm not going to preach to the choir, but everybody loves a good literate org file. We'll do a quick view of that. We want the config to be as automated as possible. If you have your preferred workflow and you want to move from computer to another, that's something that you definitely want. And then what I mean by as few files as possible, it's really, you don't want something, at least I don't want something like Cask or like maintaining or having a copy of all the packages I use. Like, but some people do it and do it great. I just don't have the energy or the strength to do that personally. I want to really worry about my own config and worry about what I'm responsible for and how I like my Emacs to behave. So that in mind, let's just do a quick overview of what's literate with org mode. Just I think, who's comfortable with org mode here? Who likes? Yeah, I think that's pretty much everybody. But just quick idea what it is. It's org mode, note-taking mode. Really easy to manage and really easy to just read all your notes as headers. You can include source code block and make it all pretty. And we use this utility called Babel, which essentially extracts all I guess the proper word is tangle all the Lisp or all the code that you have there and put it out in a Lisp file. So that works great. That's really, really helpful. What it looks like is it turns this stuff into this stuff, which is all pretty. Well, actually, that's not fair. I should show you my config file so that we all, for the video, let's say for posterity, we've never seen an org config file. This is what it looks like. You have all your headings. You can organize it the way you want. It's totally up to you. And subheadings everywhere. And inside of those, the code embedded. It's all nice, easy to maintain, easy to walk through. You can search through the entire configuration. If I want to see how to use company, boom, it's everywhere. That's easy enough. Oh, so quite a few people like stare more at the Emacs screen. That's good news. So that's basically what we expect. All right. Let's continue. Oh, actually, while I'm here, I should double check how. Oh, okay. So the install is going. It's just finishing the packages. All right. So now let's talk really about, I think, the one main takeaway from this presentation. I think a lot of people already have seen that, but for the few who don't or people who want to know more, that's definitely something I recommend, which is the automated setup. And that's really based entirely, and that's the core of everything, I believe, use package. Let's talk about use package, people. Who doesn't use package? All right. Well, I'm not going to publicly shame you because, you know, can't do that. But honestly, I personally think it's the most essential package. I really love it. And what it does, and I really encourage you to go to the official GitHub page, it's really encapsulates all the install, the require, and everything in one. And look at this use package maggot. Just encapsulate all the maggot you need, bind the command, require maggot package, binds it to the command and the key. Boom, you're done. It's beautiful. You don't have to run everywhere to get your package out of it. What does it do exactly? It's legible package management, easy configuration and binding, automatic installation, and on top of it, it includes diminish. So I think we've all had this problem where we have so many minor modes and packages active that your mode line is just giant and you can't see what's going on. Diminish will essentially hide what you decide or replace it with an alias, which makes it a lot more legible. So how do you install use package? And I really like this code. I think that's taken from the official page, so none of this is from me. This is just going to install use package diminish and bind key. Just creates a map. If it's not installed, install it. That's all it is. Then how do you trigger it? It's even more simple and beautiful. Just use package require, require, require. That's it. I like those two pieces of code next to each other because with that, just your configuration becomes that much tidier and that much easier to maintain. And notice the last little piece, this is optional. And you can set it, you can tune it, you can also choose where you download, but that's automatic install. The ensure option will automatically install the packages if it's not present on your system. That's really powerful. You can set where you want packages to be installed from for certain packages. If you want Melpa versus org, the org repos for stuff, you can also activate it by default for all the packages. It's really nice. Just for completion, yes, snippet. That's how I use it. Install it, require it, enable it everywhere. Don't show it. I think that's as concise and beautiful as Lisp can be. Maybe. Don't stone me. That's not true. Yes.
Are you saying you use package? If I use Emacs on two different machines,
mm-hmm.
I can use it to manage and manifest of all my installed packages.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah. So before I used to have a very long list. So if we go back a couple lines, before I used to maintain a very long list of hard-coded packages, and I would just run that loop for all of them. And that would be my config file, which is on GitHub. And then whenever I go on a new computer, I git clone my config file, and it will go through the loop and install all of them. I don't have to do that anymore. That was like the biggest source. And you forget one package, or it gets out of date, or you're missing a requirement, and it's all down the drain. So then the last part, as few files as possible. I think now it's clear that we've accomplished that already. of a combination of what we have. Just for reference, that's what I like to put, which is a big config with all the stuff, snippets, RSS feed, cheat sheet, and the last piece, which is an org babel replacement. You can ask yourself, what is this thing? Why is it bootstrap? Well, it's entirely taken from holgershirk.de. I don't know how to pronounce his name, I'm sorry. Essentially, it's Lisp script that will tangle a little bit faster than Babel will do. It performs a few optimization, like it won't tangle if your file is newer. If it's essentially if it's already tangled, it's not going to retangle your script. The benchmark shows it's a little bit faster, and I also use it to git pull the config file upon startup. And the advantage of this is that all the logic for tangling, the org mode, and all that git pulling stuff is totally abstract. My actual .emacs file becomes just one line, and that's the easiest because you really don't want to have config floating around into different files, and then you lose track of it. So before we move, let's take a quick look at what's going on. Okay, it's still going. It's a little bit slower than usual, I'm not going to lie, but it's okay. You know, we're padding.
Maybe it froze because it looks like it's not.
No, it's just, it was doing GCC.
No, I mean the screen. It's
Oh.
not showing it on there.
Oh, okay, it's showing on mine. Okay, well,
Okay.
we're still installing stuff. All right. And then a little bonus, and I think I've seen Persil do that, and that's something I highly recommend. It's the extra folder. Essentially just a folder that will automatically load any Lisp code in it. That thing is not under source control. The advantage is that you can place any token that you want, any secret key, anything you don't want committed to Git, or also simply just anything you want to test, just place it there. It will get loaded on startup. It's really helpful. Definitely saved me a couple times. Use package for it. Use the load dir. Just config, set it to whichever path you want. That's my load path, and set it to extra. The getignore. I did not know you could do that with getignore. That's one thing I also learned while doing this. You can say ignore everything in the extra except the readme. I don't know if you can read properly with exclamation mark. It's pretty nice. Wow, and we are really behind on the VM running. Oh well. Let's talk a little bit about performance. What's the cost of this? Because there is a cost. The cost is at maximum, if you're compiling, if you are grepping, it is going to be a hefty CPU on your host. It's going to be 25% at most, which, depending on your machine, like may be different. Maybe you use Chrome a lot, maybe you use NetBeans. In that case, you're accustomed to that. Hopefully nobody does that. NetBeans I'm talking about. Normal editing, I've noticed it's 7%. So honestly, that's nothing to be crazy about. The RAM, that's 100 megabytes. And that's very conservative. You really have to push it to get there. I have to save state for maybe a month, and then it gets to 100 megabytes of RAM, which I think is pretty nice. Don't have no reason to complain. Those numbers were a little bit big maybe a couple of years ago, but now it's perfectly reasonable. And yes, it is way better than Visual Studio I compared. That's pretty sad, actually. So, what are the limitations? What's the downside of all this? Well, you do need 8 gigabytes of hard drive space. It's not perfect in terms of integration. The shared folders and the drag and drop and the clipboard, that helps, but at the end you still have, if you have a file generated on your VM, you still have to copy it over to your shared folder and see it in your Windows, which, you know, it is a workflow. It's not great, but something you can work on. Maybe make an alias, you know, CP, and just make a quick alias or a shell function to copy over to your host machine. It does suck a little bit if you're working on Windows specific, and by that I mean C#. That's what I tested. I mean, it sucks to be working in C# in the first place. Don't troll. Don't take it personally. But the thing is that, yeah, using Emacs to just go through the code base of C# and then you have to switch to Visual Studio to debug or compile. That's not a great workflow. And then finally, I've seen like some performance issues with battery life. I don't think that's any surprise to anybody, but VM's cost on that. But you know, that's trade-offs. That's something I personally accepted to live off. And with what I've seen coming along the way, and that really forced me to clean up my config file and learn use package and do all that stuff. So that's clearly something I accept. in terms of what you could do better, what can be done better, you can install Vagrant, which is a Ruby wrapper for VirtualBox. I think it's a little bit of overkill. I've had a lot of issues with Vagrant in the past, but a lot of people like it. Essentially, what it does, all the manual VirtualBox config that you've seen me do at the beginning, which was setting up my shared drive and setting up 8 GB, all that stuff can be scripted, and Vagrant can do it for you. So essentially, you really have just one file. If you can go crazier and use Docker, because why not? And it's trendy these days. I don't really use it either. It tends to mess up your VirtualBox if you don't know how to install it. It did for me. I had a ton of issues. Finally, if you're really crazy, you can package your own Linux distribution and just install it, because everybody has that kind of time and everybody wants to do it. It's fun. I wish I could. I don't know. I don't think I can do this right now, but I wish I could do. Yes, and let's see where we are at. And I am currently installing Emacs. You can't see it, but I am installing Emacs, and it is at 60%. So, what's going on? All right, and I think that is, yes?
I have another explanation, because why not? It's like a lot of times when they give you like libraries, it's like only one distro, you know, and you try to do it on another distro, it just doesn't work.
Exactly, that's true. Like, I think it would take me several hours to redo my script to install something else than Arch Linux, which does suck when you think about it, because one day I'm going to get tired of Arch Linux. So yeah, I think that's mostly it. I'm just going to show you where the VM is at. So it's, as you can see, it is really installing via Emacs and taking its sweet time. I'm going to blame it on the internet probably being slow or something. But just to show you a final product, I have all my VMs here, as you can see, and one of them is actually actively running right now. And it's this guy that you've seen before, with i3 running in the background. Everything looks nice. You don't have any... Oh, I think I just stopped the screen capture. All right, well, it was at the end anyway. But yeah, everything running nice and smoothly. Yep, install, yep.
I have a semi-off-topic personal question about
Yes.
how you set up your configuration.
Yeah.
I recently put my whole config in a literate org mode, and I love it. But organizing it was a sort of an existential crisis. You know, how should I allot different elements? How did you choose to do yours?
I don't know. I didn't. It just turned out like that. I look at it. Some days I love it. Some days I hate it. I want to redo everything. I think that's the same for everybody. My 2 cents is that I like themes. I like starting from really generic stuff and then going into more and more detail, like per language stuff, which is how I like to do it. But totally, you can also split it into multiple org modes. You can do whatever you want. At the end, it's just really personal preference. Yeah. So where was I? Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
I have a question slightly different from this, but does anyone know how to an efficient way to load files to reload files in a buffer?
So I don't know. He said efficient. I'm going to look at you.
I wouldn't look at me. I'll ask everybody else. Does anybody know an efficient way to reload files in a buffer?
Revert all.
Yeah, revert.
So here's the thing. So you have, if I have files in my system files, right? That may be updated by version control or something.
Yeah.
Else, right? And as it stands, sometimes I have to do CXCF, right? But then it prompts you again to.
I think I do have an answer to this. So I don't know what the setting is, but I have a setting that just uses iNotify, and it watches for files that do change, that are open, and it automatically reverts them. Okay. So I could probably figure that out what that is, but there's a setting just that Emacs will
auto revert buffer.
Auto revert
Yeah,
buffer.
auto revert buffer will do that.
Maybe tail file in Emacs, by default will turn on like an auto revert buffer. Like I think you control it with a capital F.
There's a special one that's for tailing, and
Yeah.
there's a different one for just altering. But
Yeah, but I think it's called auto revert buffer, and then it's like a sub mode or minor mode you set on the file, and it just
It's also activated by default when you summon maggot, the auto revert mode, and it's advised when you look at large log files to use auto revert tail mode. Actually, that's the two which are the main. I don't know how efficient it is to answer your question. I'm gonna again look now. You don't, but
No, I just didn't want something that has to ask you each time. Like,
Oh no.
For each file, say, oh, I want to be, you know.
okay. Does anybody else have any more questions?
Small one.
Yeah.
For the VirtualBox, you just had to install that just the straight up package from nothing extra added to it just for Windows, right?
Just plain VirtualBox. Go to the main homepage. Just download and that's it. Nothing else. Actually, how is that doing? Huh.
Sorry, I got here a little late.
Yeah.
What problem are you solving with the virtual machine?
Windows. I'm solving Windows. No, I'm solving Emacs on Windows, and I was telling how I deal with not having complete control over your host and over your main machine, which is Windows, not being able to change, and how do you still use Emacs in that context.
Have you ever tried Space Max?
Wow, I don't think I want to go there right now. Honestly, I'm really tempted to.
With Emacs 25, like it even works on Windows.
Oh, really? I mean, I'd be curious to see how it works. Actually, that'd be really interesting. I wonder how they set it up.
So in this situation, is this computer then a work computer, and that's why it has Windows on it?
Yeah, that's my office laptop. Don't have any duplicate. Yeah.
Okay.
What sort of software are you writing that you can go into the Linux environment and write code there instead of the Windows environment? Like, you're not compiling Windows code? Or
Yeah, anything interpreted or cross-platform. So typically PHP, Python, Go, all that good stuff. That works either way. I work as a backend engineer, so all I do is these days is server-side stuff. So anyway, we export the code to be ran on Linux machines. We just have to work on Windows because logic. And so we have a VM running. Just most people choose to have it, running in the background or running through Vagrant. So yeah, now it's installing Bower. It's just how it is. I don't pretend it will work for all the setups. Far from it. But for any of that stuff, essentially, where you have a Linux root, or even just at home, if you just want to use org mode, that works. All right.
Cool.
I think.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, guys.